Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for being here. And we are dealing now with a very interesting topic, and thank you for the introduction on communication. That's one of the major issues that we're dealing with. And let me give you, let's say, kind of a perspective from a breeder, a breeding company. And we always say agriculture, we know about the challenges. We need to meet the food demand to secure food. We have to adapt to climate change, and sustainability is becoming more and more of an issue, so we have to produce more with less. And our belief is then, of course, as well, that plant breeding is key to master all these challenges. And we need to continue to intensively breed, and efforts are necessary to create sufficient genetic gain to match the needs that we are looking at. As a consequence, we see as a breeder that the breeding will become more complex. We have more and more complex traits to deal with. Biotic stresses will become more important in number and in intensity. Abiotic stresses are coming on top of that. And we have to deal with the fact that we need to come out with less inputs. And the range of breeding methods that we have available is increasing, is not stopping. We have double haploids, molecular markers, genetic modification, you name it, it's all there. And we are successful, right? If you look in the literature, about 50% of the productivity increases, and you can argue, of course, about it, is contributed by improved varieties. And if we continue to develop ourselves in this way, I guess that we are convinced that plant breeding also in the future will continue to play a key role. It's so-called a no-brainer to invest in breeding. The facts are very clear and convincing in my opinion. Nevertheless, we have another thing that we have to deal with. The pace is not even high enough to cope with the global challenges. And we need to even improve more and be more efficient and effective, and we are not able to leave any technology out of the toolbox. That's the inside view. And now we wonder, why is this not seen or known or appreciated by society? And why is there such resistance to technology, to technological advances and innovation in agriculture in general and plant breeding in particular? And why is the precautionary principle of plant breeding innovation so much in the foreground and not the ecological potential of it? And when thinking about it, I thought about 5 issues, and it's not complete, and I'm not an expert, but those are the things that came up in my mind when preparing for this one. I think the first one is a kind of a system question. We see modern agriculture does not have the best image at the moment. It's often related to problems, environmental problems, nitrate in the water, decrease of biodiversity, water pollution, the bee issues, you name it. I think everybody has to agrees that agriculture has to become more sustainable. And even though we are not able to make a system change, I'm sure that we can help as plant breeders to make agriculture more sustainable. Unfortunately, this also brings with it that we are seen as an extension or even a core part of modern agriculture system. And also the innovations related to it are often seen as a kind of a life extension of the current agriculture system, even though whatever we produce can be used also in other systems like in the organic agriculture. The second point is, I call it, I don't understand what you're doing thing. I think that consumers' understanding of agriculture has declined over time as we became healthier. And if you look at what happened during the Industrial Revolution and agricultural mechanization, the percentage of people working in agriculture has gone down from about 30% in the beginning of 1900s to 2% today. Urbanization is even increasing the distance to agriculture, and at the end, it's very difficult to really understand where and how our food is being produced. And the Minister of Agriculture wants to initiate even a teaching program at schools to improve this knowledge. But at the end, people do not know anymore what the problems are of the farmers, and they are not appreciating anymore the efforts to produce the cheap and healthy food that we eat today. Nor do they appreciate or accept the new technologies to do so. And this, of course, also feeds in accepting and understanding plant breeding innovations. The third point I would like to point out is, why do we need it? There is a lack of awareness for the need of innovation in agriculture, and the question is always posed, why do we need it? We have enough to feed, enough to eat. In the past 50 years we have gone through a revolution. Agriculture practices and production have gone up. The widespread adaptation of the Green Revolution led to an increase in the food grain production. We have now basically a situation that in Europe nobody is hungry anymore. We are well fed, and we can be pretty cautious about how we want to change things. The fourth thing that I would like to stress is it's so complex. The technological developments which made a big change to agriculture are happening at an ever increasing pace, and the consumers and society have not, or at least not enough, and I think you mentioned it as well, been involved in those developments, and we have not been able to communicate that. The complexity of agriculture is increasing, and that's true also for plant breeding innovation. And we also have not been able to educate society in a sufficient way. And now we are facing that people do not understand what we're doing. And of course, you start to be cautious then. The last point I would like to point out is, I don't trust you, or I don't trust you anymore. Due to many reasons, the trust of society in science, approval procedures, politics, and last not but least also in agriculture has decreased quite a lot in my opinion, and related to that also in plant breeding. We are faced often in defensive, we always looked at that we are defensive in our attitude, and what is not helping either are polarizing debates. We see also a lot of information based on selected, seemingly non-specific, seemingly non-scientific anecdotes or conclusive statements that are taken out of context. And they create an unrealistic view on the chances and risks of new technologies, if we want it or not. And we need to rebuild that trust and become much more advocate about the positives and the needs for plant breeding innovation as an important factor to tackle the challenges. This last point, then you can say, okay, now we have again a very negative world. What can we do to change it? And I think communication is key here, as Senja already mentioned. I believe that we have to be much more proactive in looking for the dialogue, also with critical people. We are doing too little, in my opinion, from a plant breeding point of view. We need to react much more strongly on misinformation or out of context news and even lies, and make it more visible and insist and repeat. Otherwise, the wrong messages stay there. We also have to better listen to society and take their concerns seriously. We have from there to develop differentiated views and opinions, and also try to work on the right problems that society worries about. And at the end, we need to be much more transparent. And I'm a very much strong advocate of open the magic black box of all we do in plant breeding, put all the technologies that we do on labels or whatsoever, because we're doing nothing illegal, and the better people understand what we're doing, the more chance we have in getting it accepted. And I think with that I would like to stop and hope this is good enough for further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to go on with our next discussion with Professor Dr. Urs Niggli. Since 1990, he is the Director General of the Research Institute for Organic Agriculture, the FiBL in Switzerland. This is the leading institute for organic research, I think at least in Europe, maybe worldwide. He's a honorary professor at the Kassel University in Nitzenhausen, and he's one of the most prominent and independent thinkers about the future of the global food and agriculture system. So we are very happy to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Achim. Among scientists, we often discuss that the skepticism or the criticism of GMO is irrational or ideological. That's not true, because the skepticism is the result of real problems and wrong or false policies. An example: to grow soybean for European feed production, feedstuff production, so that we have the cheapest meat globally here in Germany. This is basically nonsense. because savanna soils in the Mato Grosso are the most vulnerable soils, and they are hotspots for biodiversity. And we destroy them. We might not destroy them immediately, because thanks to not plowing them, we can keep them for a certain time, but after 10, 20 years, we nonetheless destroy them. Or another thing, this concentration of the seed business, like it is also documented and recent by a very new study of the OECD. This is the wrong way to go, because we need, in order to have a high agrobiodiversity, a lot of seed breeders and a lot of seed suppliers. And in a way that the package of seeds and pesticides and herbicides has become so successful and so competitive, this has fueled the concentration process. And whether this packages, this combination, is the right way to go forward, I really doubt about that. Or the dominance of some global, very, very, very excellent varieties and crops and varieties. Everybody knows that this is not a good way for sustainable farming systems to go. And so we have real problems to solve. We might discuss the wrong thing. We always discuss about technologies. We might start to discuss problems, and then we might be able to solve this blockage in the dialogue between breeders and societies. So, because of this wrong policy or of this problematic developments, what we see, I remember 30 years ago, breeding in general was not a public issue. Nobody talked about that. Seed supply was granted. I remember one of the first PhDs in Witzenhausen, Kassel University. I think it was written by Stöppler. He looked into whether the genetic gain in conventional breeding is good enough for organic as well, and he concluded, yes, we don't need organic breeding programs. That was only 30 years ago, and now organic breeding is the most important topic and very much recognized and supported by the society. And a lot of charitable foundations have invested millions and millions into organic breeding programs, and the EU Commission, with their programs in the seventh sixth, seventh framework, and especially in Horizon 2020, they have supported organic breeding programs with many EU grants, and so it has become an issue, and this is a reaction of basically a wrong policy. Or looking at the loss of agrogenetic diversity, not in seed banks or in gene banks, but on the field, the result of that was that for instance, some organization like Heirloom organization with old varieties like Arquinoa in Vienna, they became the most powerful lobbyist in Brussels. they made the EU regulation on seed breeding fail, and they even altered the organic regulation in a substantial way, because they introduced there that heterogeneous seeds is the ideal seeds for organic farming. So fighting against the US criteria, also which is also very negative for organic breeders, because this is the basis of licensing their varieties. So these are all reactions by the society to a wrong policy, and we need to talk about the problems our agricultural policy creates. We need to talk about the agriculture society wants. For instance, is it really a breeding goal for dairy cows to have 20,000 or 12 or 14,000 liters of yield? Looking at the Bavarian situation, for instance, where we have huge problems with phosphorus, nitrogen, imported by cereals, and violating the European law with over-fertilization of nitrogen and phosphorus, a problem which cannot be solved, which is the result of a breeding goal which might not be an appropriate one. If looking at the global debate how to feed the world population, should we really use the 20% of arable land globally available for feedstuff production, or should we use it for human consumption? Then we need a completely other type of dairy cows, of ruminants, for instance, feeding on grassland and not on 50% on concentrate. So all these kind of things have to be reflected, and then we might come to a solution.
Okay, thank you very much for your interesting standpoint. I think we will have an interesting discussion, but first, maybe it's not necessary to introduce Henner Simianer today because everyone knows him. Let me add to all the information that he is Vice Dean of the Faculty since a lot of years, but Henner, directly start.
Yeah, it's a bit a difficult position to be the last in the row, because many of the things that I prepared were already said. I could say them again in other words, but maybe it's also a good idea to pick up some of the ideas and also to put some questions, and also to keep short to leave more room for the discussion. I think it was a very important point, and I also wanted to make that point, to say that maybe it's not the technologies, but the use of the technologies that's a problem, or the consequences in a wider sense. That, for example, we should be aware that breeding is a very powerful instrument. So we have these genetic progresses in all traits we breed for. And some breeding technologies, especially when they are patented, like is this possible for some biotechnologies, they really can lead to structures that are at least perceived by the public and probably also by me as problematic. So when you think of monopolistic situations, and this in the long term is neither good for the society nor it is good for the science, and so these are really difficult points. And I think in this whole biotechnology or GMO discussion, I think this is what people basically have in mind. I think people identify or think about the first name that comes up is Monsanto and Roundup Ready or so. So I think the first major application was one that was conceived or perceived as a problematic business case in a way, because this is certainly also something that needs to be seen. However, for me, this doesn't explain what, or it's not very rational then to use the same argument to argue, for example, against this golden rice situation where the same technology was used for an innovation which would not lead to something bad or something which is critical, but something that is probably a good thing for in the view of many peoples. But still, sort of, once the technology is discredited, it doesn't matter what it is used for anymore. But I have the impression with this genetic engineering discussion, this GMO discussion, I think we are really in a difficult situation, and I'm a little bit disillusioned when you say that it's not helpful to argue scientifically in favor of that, or that it may even be counter or not helpful to do so. So I'm not really sure how to get out of that. But to me, the question would be, maybe it's hypothetical, or maybe we can also see it with the case of this gene editing thing. We obviously have made something wrong in the past. That's why the situation is like that. If there was a new technology which is not discredited right from the beginning, how would a good strategy look like to get a positive attitude of the public towards this technology? We had discussed in this gene editing context in animal breeding what would be sort of the killer application where everybody sees, okay, this is a great thing, and then of course we think about eradicating a disease or getting rid of antibiotics or things like that. The question is, would such an application, and if it's, of course we have the legal situation at the moment with this ruling of the European Court, but if it was applicable, could that help? Could that be a game changer, or is the whole situation so much polluted that, the opinions of the people are so firm that whatever you do, you just will not get through with that? Yeah. Okay. So that's maybe my comment on it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as far as I understood, Senja, your main starting point was attitudes are fixed now, and as well, Henner, Simianer, he mentioned we did some mistakes in the past. So the important phase was the end of the 90s and the beginning of the new century for this discussion about GMO. Maybe let's start with one round really talking about the failures, because maybe we can learn from that phase for the next generation of genome editing or other technology questions. What failures in particular did the industry and did science made in this phase? Who's liking Who's like?
Like to hear the outside view.
Yeah? What do you think, Senja? What mistakes did the sector make?
I think a mistake was to shy away from the public debate in the first place. Maybe I would have done the same. Of course, as a scientist, it's not your primary goal to speak out in public when you're active in science or even in industry. There are things that are more important, and sometimes it's not very pleasant to be engaged in a public controversy. But I think it was a mistake. I think scientists and other actors might have underestimated the influence of the public debate and its long-term effects. And yeah, maybe we can make a second round where we talk about how we can make things better that would relate to the points you raised. Yeah, I would still say don't make the same mistake again, and despite this these problematic effects of facts or the ineffectiveness of facts, go out and speak up, because what I showed you were short-term effects, and it doesn't mean that in the long run we can still change public perceptions. But yeah.
Yeah. But was it a failure of science, or was it the industry? Monsanto was the one who introduced the technology in the US and later on in Europe, and I think we all saw that the strategy of introducing it in the US didn't work in Europe. Huh?
Oh, that's right. The question is what is the big cause? I think in general, if you look at the population in the US, and there is now also more and more criticism popping up, but it's mainly in areas where there is no agriculture. I think if you look at the Midwest of the US, agriculture is the main issue, and the people over there see it on a rational basis and look at GM as a benefit to their agriculture system. Irrespective of whether you like the system or not, but that is their system. If you now start looking at Europe in a situation where you have much less people working in such a concentrated area, and many and very little people are working there, you have to go a different way. And I think that having an American company being responsible for communication in the US, I would say that is at least not helpful. And I think we have sensed it as well when we were doing our experience, and we have tried hardly to get around the bready sugar beet in the European market. And at the end, it was not even possible, despite many efforts in terms of communication, inviting stakeholders out of critical groups as well. But it was even impossible to get our experiments through. And actually, at the end, we stopped. Despite all the public work that we did, we stopped because we were not protected by, let's say, the environment to do that in a safe way, and our employees were basically threatened. And that really showed what the power of the public debate is. I guess that when we started to work on it, it was maybe already one step too late. But it would have been very helpful, I think, if science would have helped the debate and put it from, let's say, a more rational perspective. If we communicate as always, you do it because you want to make profits. Yes, of course we want to make profits, but we pay taxes as well, and we employ people as well. But that's not taken for granted. I think that the science community has really a big opportunity to support the work that they do in science, to get that also, let's say, in a way in the market that it is beneficial for society.
Yeah, what is the role of science in such an early phase of a debate? Because now we have a lot of information that first GMOs are not dangerous. We know it from 20 years now. But during the 19th, so 20 years ago, maybe the situation was not so clear as today. Huh? So, Senja, as you said, scientists should not be so engaged in the debate. They should be a little bit cautious to take a party, to be one-sided, partisan parties in such a discussion. Or what is your recommendation? And what was your experience? Which experience did you make during that time, and in which way do you describe the role of science?
Yeah, basically I remember well the group of the Biocenter in Basel around Werner Arbert, the first one inventing this gene scissor, this first gene scissor 40 years ago. This group at the Basel University, they were all extremely enthusiastic scientists, young ones from the 68 generation, and they all had a dream mainly to replace conventional agriculture with a lot of nitrogen fertilizer, phosphorus fertilizer, and pesticides by a self-regulating agriculture where via breeding, via utilizing the genetic potential of plants to create a better agriculture. I have led several discussions with them, and in a way they, until they got retired, they were frustrated that the young generation didn't believe them, that they wanted the best thing for humanity. And so this is a strange situation. They had a lot of good examples, potentially good application. And the first thing the industry brought on the market was Roundup or glyphosate resistance. So they immediately came with the package of seeds and herbicides. And glyphosate was at the beginning herbicide registered for tiny surfaces. It was, as a total herbicide, it was only used, not in agriculture, it was used on wasteland, etc. And suddenly it became a herbicide used on millions and millions of hectares. A completely different application for compared to what it was registered, and that's why we might have run into problems. So in a way, I think that the industry didn't really came up with the best potential use of what the technology could have offered. And what is amazing is that this is an analysis of Andreas Senker from the Saat, the journalist. He said that in the beginning, early 90s, the media all immediately took up all these terrible pictures of the NGOs. Soil Association in UK, for instance, they came with Frankenstein food. And I think this was the strongest picture ever created in PR, that GMO is like Frankenstein who cannot control what he produced. And all this, you might remember all these terrible pictures, like mice having
syringe,
eine Giftspritze in their belly, and so on. And I think this has changed this time, because I have had a lot of contacts with many journalists, and in a way their reports and how they reacted in the discussion of genome editing, especially CRISPR-Cas, was quite neutral. But obviously, yes, you said something which is very important, that once your brain is in a way impregnated by an opinion, it is very difficult to override this opinion. Please.
And what happens when a new technology evolves, or when we form our attitudes over science and technology as lay people? We are not guided by the scientific literature or whatever. We are mostly guided by what we call frames. And I think what science have to do, frames are like how you interpret a certain technology, and what do you associate it with? Do you associate it with Monsanto, or do you have other associations? And I think what scientists have to do when a new technology emerges is they have to be active in creating frames and in countering like only negative frames, when scientists know there are also positive sides to it. Because otherwise a public debate is really lost and is only maybe on the negative side and will become one-sided. And I can see things like this happening right now with a genome editing debate. I have no study, it's just anecdotal evidence. I can, like it's everyday observations I make, but I see there are frame competitions, you might say, going on. For example, the Green Party is talking about new gene technologies, and others are actively avoiding the term green technology. They say the new breeding techniques. And to me, this is a strategic attempt to reframe the debate and to dissolve it from the old gene technology trauma that we had in Germany. And I think scientists could participate in this and, for example, point out positive things like the golden rice story or whatever, and be really proactive in these things.
So maybe with this we should come to the recent situation, and we are now in a situation where we have a new technology. We have heard a lot about genome editing these days here, but we also have a more complex situation now, because it's no longer a debate not only about GMOs, but it's also, and you have mentioned it, about market concentration in the seed sector. It's about new problems, so a combination of pesticides and breeding technologies. It's about a discussion about animal welfare, to mention one other thing, and breeding improvements and animal welfare on the other side. It's about bees. So we have quite a mixed picture. So the debate is broader today, more difficult topics which are mixed together, and then we have this new technology in the core of this new discussion. And do we see new options to have a better, more science-based development in this mix of different topics, and in a society which has framed or which has made its experiences, they have a strong view on GMOs, and so in which way can we find those new solutions in a way that we all maybe in this discussion round think that we need the technology, but maybe we should talk about the problems behind, and in which way can we organize it, this new type of debate in the society, to come a little bit out of this trap. Do you have ideas?
Well, I can say what we're trying to do. I would come back on this framing that you mentioned, and one thing that we did within the breeders' associations, especially in ESA, we don't talk about new breeding technologies per se. We don't talk about genome editing per se. We talk about plant breeding innovations. And plant breeding innovations, already from the tone, has a different impact than genetic engineering or genetic modification. So that's one thing that goes exactly in that direction. And by the way, we have a hashtag embracing nature on Twitter, and you can have a look at that because they are very active and not only promoting genome editing, but what could be the benefit of plant breeding for society. That's at least the aim. They also actively try to engage in discussion in a respectful way. I think that was your key word actually. Be respectful if you are discussing also with people that are critically. And do that in a very good way. The question here is impact. We try to join forces, and I think one of our issues as a plant breeding industry, and this is not an excuse, but as a reality, is that the means that we have to communicate, and I think that's to some extent also true for science, is very limited. And if one thing could be done in line with what Senja mentioned, I think that every university has to have that center of safeness, where a very active communication is being executed. If you don't do that, we will never be able to enter in the public's minds. Let's keep it there.
Other options here. Henner?
As a scientist, it's not your job to create frames, at least not. I wouldn't know how to do it. And I think that's part of the problem, that sometimes scientists may be a little bit naive in this respect. I remember, we talked of pictures, I remember one of the first GMO pictures in animal science. There was a transgenic pig for growth hormone, and they put this huge pig and especially a short person in front of it. So and they were very proud of that. So I think it was on the cover of Science or Nature or so, and it was also reprinted. But every normal person thought that's a horrible pig in a way. But probably the scientists thought that was a great idea to present, and it was very impressive, but in a negative way. On the other side, you all remember Dolly. There was this cute little sheep and Dolly, and that was, I think that was a rather positive thing, although cloning also didn't make it, but it was not as bad as that. But I think there is really a lack of awareness among the scientists of how these mechanisms are and how to, I think you have to invest time and money in developing a reasonable communication strategy for such innovations. And as far as I can see, that's not usual, not there, or there's very little support at the university on a professional level. We are working on it in Göttingen.
You already have a professor here.
When I was at the European Seed Association in Brussels with my students from Witzenhausen, some of them got very angry when they used the term plant breeding innovation. So I don't know whether, because they say this is only about hiding away that it is genetic engineering, and you again want to cheat on us. And in a way, I'm not so much convinced that reframing or rewording is really the best way to go further. But when I looked at the characteristics of for instance, CRISPR-Cas, I realized that some of these characteristics have really taken up the problems of the old genetic engineering technology, like it is in a way more accessible to small and medium enterprises in breeding, so it's affordable to use it, and it has much less off-targets effects than any other method of mutation. So these are some huge advantages. And, but I realized that with arguing on that, with using this, reasons, one cannot destroy all the skepticisms of those who are skeptical. So we have to address we have to discuss about the precautionary principle. This is the most important argument at the moment against genome editing. We don't know yet enough, and because the principle of precaution is so deeply in our legislation that we need to respond on that. But then we need to discuss and we need to compare risks we take in society. Because sometimes we take extremely high risks if the advantage is really high as well. And sometimes we take no risk when we don't see an advantage for us. So I think this is an important discussion we have to lead. And we should lead that with all respect. I realized that when I said in public that it's a good technology, they were not angry. They were not angry of me because I said that, because they said, you said it so absolutely. This is not respectful against us as skeptical people. So we really need to discuss with all respect with those criticizing these things. So non-targets effect, it has to explain that this is the normal way of breeding, because or off-targets effect, and this is what we have with all mutagenesis, and we have to discuss that. We have to discuss the precautionary principle, and we have to lead also ethical discussion, because many people think that it is not ethical to manipulate directly the DNA, and so if we can discuss that in a very relaxed way, then I think we will find a solution out of the problem.
May I react?
Yeah, please.
I wish that most of the people that are critically are as reasonable as you are, because I can just tell from an experience just 2 days ago in the Bioeconomy Council dealing with people from the Environmental Ministry, and it's unbelievable what kind of arguments they bring up in order to support this precautionary principle. And I think one addition that we have to make, I mean, I'm open and willing to discuss about this in a very differentiated and balanced way, but then I wouldn't not like to be irrespectively treated with non-arguments, non-scientific issues and even lies that are put up there in an open discussion as being the truth. And this is a bit what happens if you talk with people that are against it from an ideological point of view, because you get this motivated reasoning in an extreme way, and that is quite difficult. And probably I'm doing that myself as well. I'm not excluding it. Maybe no, I'm pretty sure, but that makes it difficult.
So we are looking for new types of discussion, a discussion which maybe should bring two things together. On the one hand, a more differentiated discussion about the new technology, but I'm quite sure that this is only possible to do this with the society and with NGOs if we in parallel bring all the problems was mentioned also on the table. So I think it's not possible to discuss only about a new technology. We have to bring the things together, and I think this is quite problematic, and maybe we should find new formats for that, new types of discussion. I'm not sure in which way. Maybe we at least need more capacities, more money for that from different sides to bring people together. But on the one hand, we live in a social media time, in which Twitter, news, and Facebook accounts are more and more important. So it's not easy to create such types of an ideal discussion in such a society with so deep framed positions. But I think we have now last quarter for discussion, and we should open it to the public or to all you as experts. Do you have questions or comments to our discussion round here, please? Okay, maybe we should make a round now here in the panel. Would like to start? Some ideas?
Plant breeding should start, I guess. Yeah, I mean, this, the model that you're referring to is a bit this participative breeding, I assume, in relation to closed chain, or did I understand it wrongly? Publicly, yeah. Yeah, I guess that for smaller breeding programs, that is definitely a way. I assume. I'm just imagining how that will work for a global corn program. So, and actually, we do such a thing, but in a different way. I mean, we are not breeding from an ivory tower and then define our traits and then we go forward. It's hopefully being based on market intelligence, being in contact with the farmers, what their needs are. You can question whether that's enough, and you have to go one step further, even downstream. That's with commodities not very easy to get further down. I think in smaller crops like maybe peas or oats, there you could definitely think of those things and combine in the chain the knowledge in order to get better products. But for the bigger commodity crops, I can't see that we are sitting with the end consumer on the table directly. Because of just the massive volume of it, but maybe we should discuss and maybe have some other ideas that we can exploit.
But maybe this is also a question more about transparency in general. We did a small research about genome editing, asking consumers in Germany, and one result was they really know nothing about that. There's not a strong opinion about that. They are quite unsecure. But the thing which is quite stable, and the opinion which is quite stable, is that the public is voting for labeling. So they want to know what is in their food. besides knowing nothing, but they want to know which technology is used. What do you think here on the table? Is there a combination of a differentiated discussion about new technologies combined with transparency, with labeling?
I don't have anything against labeling, not at all. I think I mentioned that in my statement as well, that I'm happy to put every single technology that we use on what kind of label, because whatever we do is transparent, it's legal, and if it helps, let's say, to open up the discussion on what we do and how we're doing it, I would do it, and we are discussing internally already on how that could be done in practice, because our label ends on a bag of seed, and then how it's moved forward. So maybe there's a technological issue, but in order to gain trust and show what you're doing, I mean, that would not be a problem. The only thing I would like to mention is that it should not be used to classify things in, and then it's bad, and then it's not bad. Because that's the issue with gain technique, GM in, and then implied is, and therefore it's bad. And as long as that is avoided, I would be more than happy to do so, and we're moving in that direction.
I would like a comment, certainly also true for the plant breeding side, but also especially in the animal breeding side. We should be aware, and I think most people in the room are aware, that breeding is not an easy thing to do. I started off, of course, I started with my first slide in my introduction yesterday was that breeding is easy, but there are in the meantime a lot of technologies involved and a lot of quite complicated steps and a lot of optimization and so on. And I think, in a way, it is. I'm not sure whether all breeding programs in all species are so easy to decide or to optimize in a sort of democratic process. I think there are really things that need expertise and need also some real deep insight into say, for example, genetics. So it's a little bit like you also wouldn't like to have an airplane constructed by a group of laymen that think how an airplane would look like, or so you wouldn't prefer to fly with that airplane. And therefore, I think it's certainly true that there may be some niche breeding programs that can be developed on a very sort of let's say in a democratic basis. But I also think that some of the big crops and livestock breeding programs, they have become so complicated, and that also may be a problem, that they are so complicated, but they have to do so. On the other side, there are always these claims that we have to add more traits like health and animal welfare related traits. These are traits that are especially difficult to improve by genetics. And at the same time, things should be easy and transparent, and that doesn't go together. So I think there is a little bit of a conflict in my point of view.
I think it's important to talk, to really discuss the problems of agriculture. We have, because of economic reasons, we have simplified agricultural practices, especially crop rotations. We have neglected good farming practice. And so we have many problems, like we have a lot of resistant weeds we can no longer control. Only as one example, we discussed that recently in the National Action Plan for Pesticides. And so with new technologies, being GMO or being genome editing, or being it precision farming, we can further simplify agriculture because of economic reasons, or we can go back to diversified agriculture. The technology alone doesn't guarantee one or the other, so we really need to discuss what is our goal, what are the preferred sustainable farming systems we want, and how much can it cost? This is the most important question. And discussing that, we don't have to continue to discuss technologies, and the way forward, I think, is that we look into case-by-case decision-making, because, for instance, with disease resistances in apples and in other crops, we have introduced for 100 years single or complex resistances via crossbreeding. Why should that be more dangerous than introducing it via CRISPR-Cas? There is no reason for that to believe that it's more dangerous. But if we talk in general about CRISPR-Cas or genome editing, then people are afraid because there are so many dangerous application of the same technology.
That is actually very close to what I meant with framing. I should have made clear that claiming is about highlighting certain information. It's a certain perspective. For example, if you speak about GMOs and you think of Monsanto, you can say, no, there are many more aspects, many more topics one could raise. And this is a little bit what you said. You raise certain issues. Every frame consists of a problem definition, and then you look how can we solve it? What do we have in hand? And this is what I think is essential in talking about technologies and the scientist share of bringing aspects that you uprightly believe are seriously neglected in public, that you bring those to the forefront.
Okay, last chance for the audience to raise a topic or a question. Is there anyone? Someone would like to answer? Senja, I think you said something about that point. Can you try to?
Yes. I think it's a tricky question, and I have to think a little, or a tricky comment rather. I think scientists have to be aware of politicizing. And by that I mean scientists should, in my opinion, not mix politics with their science, or they should not deduce political necessities from their research. I think that this would undermine scientists' credibility. But I think scientists should communicate about their research in public and organize this kind of communication. I was thinking, while this discussion was going on, a lot about the initiative Tierversuche verstehen. I'm a big fan of it. I don't know if many of you know it. It's called, the translation would be Understanding Animal Research, and it's a communication initiative. It's a platform different science organizations that regularly informs about research that was conducted based on animal research. And of course it shows very like research successes and everything. And I don't think initiatives like that put scientists' credibility at risks. It may be a kind of lobbyism, but of course it's a very public, a very transparent lobbyism. I rather think that platforms like this, I don't know if that would function for other topics, but they rather offer an opportunity for journalists. When a topic comes up, you have to imagine that journalists don't have a lot of time, but when an issue comes up, they can jump to that platform, and they have this particular perspective at hand. They don't have to look for an expert, and they don't have to dial until they have one. They have it at hand there. And I think that can only help. It doesn't mean that journalists should only rely on this particular platform. No, they should also, of course, interview like opposing views and whatever, but they should also consider this platform. And I don't think that initiatives like this would put scientists' credibility at risk.
Please.
Yeah, I think discussing with people has nothing to do with lobbyism. We should do that, absolutely, to make people understand what we do in a very transparent way. This is a common thing. And making recommendation for policymaker based, for instance, of scenario modeling, or based on very complicated algorithms. This is also extremely important, because otherwise how could policymakers make the right decisions? At our institute we have the huge advantage that we have 30 people working in the socio-economic department, very close to the plant scientists, to the crop scientists, to the livestock scientists, and they use the results of the pure scientific research to improve their models, and then to make recommendations, but also published recommendations. We always try to publish our recommendations from modeling in Nature and in other prestigious scientific journal. We need to do that. Otherwise, from a pure natural scientist point of view, we can no longer communicate with people and policymakers.
I think one phenomenon that is came to my mind, or when we were discussing that, is that in many discussions the positions are very clear. Either you are completely in favor of something or you're completely against it. And actually in science, at least in my point of view, there are many things where I'm not so sure. I think they probably are good, but there may be problems. And I wonder whether it would also help sometimes for scientists or in the public debate to take such an intermediate position, whether this I could imagine that it might improve credibility to some extent.
Léon, you have the chance for a last statement.
I would say, based on know your command lobbying, we are just starting. We were just talking about the visibility of science at all. So before you reach a level of intensity of interaction that you may call it lobbying, I think we're still far away, and it would take any opportunity to help and support the scientists to be able to communicate. And then see where we go. And I would agree that as long as you do it in a very authentic way, you don't politicize, then people can differentiate if you do that because you need something from them, or you do that because you want to get in a dialogue. And then I think from the science point of view, you have to do the latter, because the credibility is at stake at the end if you do it the wrong way. I would agree to that. But if you do the right way, I think you still have a lot of opportunities to discuss and make opinions instead of changing. And there was one comment that Senja made, and I once was in a conference where a journalist was there and asked, who of you has ever changed his opinion on an important matter? And there were about 500 people, and there were exactly 5 hands. And this is exactly one of the problems we have with GM, and that's why you have to start informing people in a very, very early stage so that they can make up their mind in an early way based on facts rather than on fears.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very special panel discussion, I think, because this topic of science communication is not an easy one. And you saw us here all more searching, more thinking about different ways and not presenting a direct solution or giving recommendations really clear. I think this is not possible for this different topic, and the type of communication in our society is changing now. It's more and more changing, and this makes science communication even more complicated. And so from my point of view, I've learned a lot about this topic today, and a lot of food for thought, maybe for your way home, to think further in which way we can organize such dialogues, in which way we can bring this dialogue further in the society with NGOs, with political, with consumers as well. It's a chance for us as scientists, and it's very sure and work for interdisciplinary work. And yeah, maybe this is closing the round, because this new center here for integrated breeding should bring together different forms of science, should bring together not only plant and animal breeding, but also social sciences. And yeah, this was a good starting point, and maybe this is also a good point for you to say some last words to the audience. Okay. Thank you, Henner.
Yeah, thank you. Famous last words. No, I first of all thank you for chairing this last session, and thanks to the panelists. I think it was a good something different. We usually don't talk about these topics at such meetings, so but I think it was a very good idea to do so, and I thought in the beginning it was a good idea. Now I know it was a good idea. And with this, we are at the end of this conference. As I said in the beginning, the conference was a little bit thought for setting the stage of the center and trying to visualize what we hope to achieve, which is creating critical mass in breeding research, and also creating synergies, learning from each other, and seeing new ideas. And I think that was my impression, and I also had the impression, or had the feedback from quite a number of participants that the usual saying was, I didn't understand everything, but it was very impressive to see what those guys are doing, and we could do something similar in our field. So that's exactly what this center and this meeting was about. And so in this case, my impression is that this meeting was quite successful and fulfilled the expectations that we set into that. So I thank you all for participating and staying these 2 days. And also last night, I will not, Udi Preisinger is looking angry at me, I will not name the sponsors a third time or a fourth time. But I still thank them, especially for sponsoring the dinner last night, and of course for sponsoring the center. And we certainly will think in the center whether such an event eventually could be repeated on a regular basis, certainly not every year, but maybe every second or third year, to also to monitor a little bit the progress, how we sort of grow together. So thank you all for coming, and I think with this, and we are 4 minutes past 3, so that is almost on time. I would like to close this meeting, and I wish you all a good trip back home, especially those that have come a long way. Thank you very much.